So before we go back in the session, so again, things exist, but things exist as an appearance to our mind. That's the way for the moment to look at it. And things exist because they perform functions. And my iPad exists because it does something. It's not a fata morgana in that way. But it does not exist the way it appears to exist. And that appearance is my problem. Because my aversion, my desire, my depression, my jealousy, and so on and so forth, all require that appearance. They respond to that appearance. In this case, the appearance of the self. So there is a person, but that person appears to have, to use that language that I just chose, that appears to have a self. You see Gendun, and Gendun exists, but if you look for Gendunness, the self of Gendun, the soul of Gendun, then you have a problem. That doesn't exist. I inter-exist, I happen. Does it make sense? That is the object of meditation. So be mindful of that. So I will pull at your ignorance a little bit here and there, but it's important to keep ourselves healthy. It's not to undermine your personhood. In fact, the point is to liberate your personhood. So to see who you are, so that you can navigate yourself in wholesome ways. And again, the Buddha in that sense is the perfection of personhood. The Buddha sees truly, and arahats do, they see truly who they are as persons. And therefore they can navigate that personhood in perfection where we run into major trouble. Yeah? Does that make sense? One sip of coffee more. As you just remarked, this is my 8th hour of talking, so I need fuel. Yeah. So again, comfortable position. And so to keep it succinct, we can invite the Buddha again. And taking a moment to practice letting go. The object of our senses, of the body, of the mind. And so when you are relaxed, try to find a memory in which you were unpleasantly challenged. Conflict, accusation, or when you felt vulnerable. Not too traumatic, but a nice one. And let it replay in your head. Give your mind a moment to indulge. And while that story is playing, take a look of that sense of self, of I that appears. Turn it around in your awareness. Getting a good sense of how it feels, how it is placed in the world. That you get a good sense of what appears to you when you think about it. So now that we have a good sense of it, we can start to investigate and see if we can find it. And where else to find it that within the contents of our experience. So we could start with the body. Is the body the self? Well, we are often doubtful about that identification. But when the evaluation is positive, when someone tells us that we are handsome or pretty, we eagerly take it as a self. But as soon as it gets into trouble, we disavow it. But when we investigate the body as a basis for the self, we get into trouble. So we experience ourselves as a singular thing. Well, our body definitely is made up of parts. We experience the self as unchanging. But it is equally apparent that the body changes all the time. The self should be independently in control. Yet most of the activities of the body are outside even the scope of our awareness. Let alone when it acts under pressure or conditions that are not of our making. When it is ill or tired, nervous. Which is an unsatisfactory situation, and the self should be satisfactory. So here we have our first not finding. And maybe feeling is a self. As we are attached so deeply to it that it has become a philosophical argument. I feel that way. But does that stick? When we investigate, feeling is also compounded and not one. Always changing and not continuous. Not powered by our will, but powered by conditions, such as the object and karma. Not capable of providing satisfaction. and so not self. The second, non-finding. And maybe discernment might fit the bill. The basis for our views. Also here, discernment is always changing. Without continuity. Conditioned not by will, but by language and cultural concepts. Sometimes not showing us what we would like to see, and all too often showing us that which we do not want to see. Therefore unsatisfactory and not a candidate for herself. A third, not finding. And it should be found in intention, the jewel of our free will. Nevertheless, equally impermanent. And all too often not doing what we want. Controlled by feeling rather than by choice. Therefore unsatisfactory and not self. The fourth, non-finding. Then our final option, consciousness. But here we run exactly into the same struggles. Not one, but compounded into 6 minds and 51 mental factors. Always changing, and entirely dependent for its existence on observed objects. But knowing without known makes no sense at all. Therefore not satisfactory and definitely not self. The fifth non-finding. Then if the self exists as it appears to us, there's only one option left. That is that it would exist separate from the aggregates, as something that lords over them. What would such a self be? But such a self would be unconscious, without intent, knowing nothing, without experience. And here again we found no self. Having finished our options. Although it clearly appeared to us when we looked for it, we did not find it. Let your mind for a while abide in that non-finding. There was something heavy in that memory that made you respond. And that you looked for it, you did not find anything at all. See what it does to you to dwell in that non-finding. Let's hold it for a moment with our samadhi. And with that, we can slowly rise to meditation. Let's see, lion thrones, auras. Nope. Well, if I keep my head right, then I have one. I block out the Buddha. How did that go?
I felt like just when I've experienced the big blue sky, I had to come back, almost had to wrench myself back.
Sorry, I heard half of that.
I said, just when I was feeling the big blue sky, you prompted the meditation to be done, so I had to wrench myself back, but I feel like I need to go back again. It feels amazing.
I only want to share this because it was I thought it was particularly useful for me, so it might be useful to somebody else. And it really helped in this meditation. It was that I was recently not hired. And so I was specifically thinking, who was that person that wasn't hired? Because it was a very emotional, it's like you said, finding an emotional thing. And it was really useful to be like, were they trying to hire my head? Were they trying to hire my feet? Was it my knee hired or my heart hired? Was it I just kept coming back to it because it did feel like there was something there that wasn't hired because I was so offended that this didn't happen, you know? And that was a really useful way to do it because it was so easy sort of to ask the question, you know, when you were saying, well, we didn't find this self anywhere. Like in comparison to that, I was like, yeah, I don't even know what was the thing that they even hired, you know, even though I felt it still, because I could tell you, oh yeah, there was a person not hired or something, you know. Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to share that because it felt really easy way to grasp how you were leading through the meditation with that particular thing. I don't know why, it just felt so every day, you know. Anyway, so thank you for letting me share.
Yeah. That's
Okay, so I was fighting afternoon lag and sleepiness. I'll just be honest.
coffee.
Yeah, coffee. Yeah, I did make myself a cup, but a decaf. But I could feel like I was sort of maybe still, but my mind was very dull. And it wasn't on an object of even not finding. It wasn't moving around. It was sort of dead. But that's not a good thing, right?
No.
Yeah.
No, that's not a good thing at all.
Yeah.
That's not a meditative object. That's not mindfulness even.
Right.
Yeah, that's thinking.
That's thinking. But I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dozing off or anything. Not like.
If you would have kept this a while,
I would have fallen asleep. Yeah.
yes.
And so I didn't catch that because I slipped into that state. But I was sort of aware that I wasn't 100% on what we were supposed to be meditating on. So that's not a good state to continue the meditation. So if that were to happen again, I should just come out of it and
On this type of meditation, you just start from scratch.
Start again, hey?
Yeah. One thing we have difficulty arousing deliberate thought. We think a lot, but uncontrollably. And to harness thought, to learn to think deliberately is quite a challenge. That is why in this tradition, Lamrim contemplation is so important. It allows you to think in deliberate. It trains you to use your thinking in deliberate ways, which is a very good way to. That's one of the reasons why it is a preliminary to calm abiding and special insight. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, one should always end that. This is very tricky. You can get into states that are where the mind is highly immobile, and it looks sort of semi-clear. Once you sink into that, that's not so easy to get yourself out.
Right, right.
And the mind is habitual, so once it likes it, it will go back
Stay
there.
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Okay, Michelle. Okay.
By the way, to tell one's joke in the middle, there's a funny little ad, I think, about for a language course, where there's a German Coast Guard and there's a British ship, and the British ship calls SOS, we are sinking. The German Coast Guard responds, what are you thinking about? That's hilarious.
I have a question about piti. I don't think I've ever had that, but sometimes when you do bodhicitta meditation, then you feel such joy in it, and then you go into shamatha to try and maintain it. But you still have the joy, but that's different from piti.
No, it's not. No.
Okay.
Well, many of the texts define it in a very narrow way, and I think that is incorrect. So the Abhidharma tends to focus indeed on shamatha, and that is where most people first find it. But in the end, all wholesome mental qualities are able to do that. But there's two ways to think about this. Is that on the one hand, usually when we just think about compassion, in our case, this is a mixed bag. And so it requires quite a bit of analysis to make sure that the other pity is not there.
Thank you.
And so, because there's different things in there that can elicit feelings. And so it's not always wholesome. So it takes a bit of playing around to purify one's compassion or one's generosity and so on and so forth. So that also the pity becomes obvious. On the other hand, the hindrances of the mind that prevent calm are again aversion, attachment, distraction, sloth and torpor, and spiritual doubt. And when real compassion is in the mind, or real generosity and so on and so forth, they naturally block out these other ones as well. Not with the same power, at least if you deploy them in daily life, but they do block them out. And so if you have a really compassionate attitude towards someone, at that moment, the mind is also free of aversion and desire. And that is the way to look at it. So the absence, that freedom of the mind, let's put it in a different way, as I highlighted it already earlier, is that and that is a very encouraging way to think about it, is that in most cases our well-being, what we experience as well-being, what we experience as pleasant, is almost always a relief. In other words, it gives you a hint that the nature of the mind is quite blissful, but it's hindered. And so our constant barrage of thinking, all these distracting, disturbing emotions, inhibit the joy of the mind. And every time you can block them out, there's a very natural growing of pleasantness. When we do that, though, on the basis of temporarily fulfilling our desires, this is deeply troubling. Because because of the fact that we misunderstand where it comes from, we nourish the animal. And so when you're angry, it gives you temporary sense of control, which gives then a moment of pleasantness. But that is only because we want to be, we have a temporary relief of our sense of lack of control, and so on and so forth. That's on the one hand is extremely short-lived, and secondly, it feeds the delusion. And so that is the difference with either calm abiding or with other wholesome emotions, is that this is a pleasantness that you can therefore let grow as long as that emotion is within you. And on the other hand, that it is to some extent free of delusion. It observes something that is true. For example, compassion implies when I feel that I'm not being hired, what I feel is a self-existing self, a disconnected self. So I am magnificent, or I thought I was magnificent, and I've now just been told that I'm actually awful. And so pride and self-deprecation go quite hand in hand. We end up jumping back and forth between the price of pride is self-deprecation. That is inevitable. And pride comes before the fall for very good reasons. And so that's a disconnected I am in permanence independently type of thing. And so that in that sense, what you did was very good. Very good way to approach it, to rephrase it. But compassion implies very interesting things. And when I feel compassion, it means that my empathy worked. I was changed by the person that I was compassionate for. And I have a belief that that other person exists in dependence on me such that I can make a difference. It shows you some of the interdependence between yourself and that other person that you have compassion for. So observes at least part of the real way the world exists. And so when that arises, therefore, you have that insight blocks, at least for a moment, the hindrances. They can't arise. They are dependent on ignorance. And then you have something that is not a temporary relief that refeeds the monster. You put something into place that protects you, and that can grow. And that is why piti and sukha can grow. And so once you have it, and once you have a good grasp on, for example, compassion, you can keep it. You can hold on to it. You can cultivate it. And then it can grow where pleasure can never do that. Pleasure must always be self-defeating. If I'm hot and I sit below the air conditioning, within 5 minutes I'm getting cold. So the pleasantness is lost quickly. And moreover, I will be disappointed. And that's the emptiness that your favorite pizza leaves behind when you desire it. Yeah. Because you have really believed when you bought it, this is going to be a fun evening, and 10 minutes later, it's gone. And then nothing. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious on how to grow that part of the non-hindrance, because I find that once I notice no affliction, for example, maybe I have some worry, and then once I notice the mind is free from that, then I give it a commentary, and then I'm already happy, like, oh, it's gone. Or if I saw less of an I, oh, it's not so clear anymore, and then I also give a commentary again.
Yeah. The answer is actually, and that is very often the case. That is one of the nice things about being a meditation teacher. I almost 2/3 of my answers are just highlighting what you have already said. You already gave the answer. I am commenting. You're not. It's automatic. That's all that you need to see. It's just distraction. That's all. Because many people suffer from that commenting voice, that you are meditating and something is talking along the way. Yeah. Many, I don't have it, by the way, but many people do. And the answer is not fight it, because then you have two of them. And then you have the commenting voice and the voice that is commenting on the fact that you should not be commenting. And we get very quickly like a recursive function. We often do that, like meditating, and then you get angry over something and you think like, I should not be angry. And then I did it again. And then you get a sort of like an endless escape of trying to fight anger with anger. And that is where emptiness or selflessness plays a major role. It's simply seeing for what it is. To see it's not self. The commenting voice is just that. It's just automated thinking. And the thing is not to want it to go away. Because if you want it to go away, you start to think about a pink elephant. Then you start to pay attention to if it is already gone. And so the thing is not to mind it. Like, okay, this is something that happens. And in time, and I should not be, in a way, I should not be saying it, so I'm going to say it, and then you shall forget about it. Sometimes we have to do weird things with our own mind. But the trick is that if you leave it just be, in time, the mind will just forget about it. Because you will not be paying attention to it. You pay attention to it because the mind identifies with it. In fact, you have two commentator voices if you would look really deeply. So you have this voice telling the story, and there's a second one actually that tells, I said that. I said that, I said that, I said that, I said that. And the second one keeps it going. And so the first one, not to want to do that, creates a problem because then you get stuck in it. But the second one, you can simply defeat by seeing it is not you doing that after all. Because if I were doing that, then I could just simply stop doing it. And so then you leave it just going. Yeah. And that is actually that capacity is very useful. I used it in the beginning when I started the year before my monastic life. I still suffered quite a bit from depression, which is not easy to overcome, even if you have the Dharma. And one of the answers was hey, you have very unpleasant feeling. You have lots of very bad obsessive thinking. And what I didn't realize is that there was a second voice that it should not be that way. I'd never noticed the last one. And then I noticed that the last one was keeping the whole thing going. I felt not good enough for being depressed. And I didn't realize that last aspect of it. And then at one point, I just thought that bad thinking is just what is happening. It's not really what I'm doing. Just let it run. So it's not self, doesn't mean anything. Let it just do whatever it does. I will keep my distance from it. And then what you're left with is just very unpleasant feeling. But you don't feed the beast anymore. And bit by bit, that the obsessive thinking then just dies because you don't feed it. It takes time, but it doesn't leave you.
Yeah, so I understand. So that's that distraction, that commenting, even though it's the positive, like because I no longer saw my worry, but I think I'm trying to differentiate that from noticing that it's there and then to cultivate it, because you were talking about try to increase that. So could you talk more about
that's
that
a very
process
good
without
point.
being distracted?
Actually, that was what we talked about this morning in the in-depth meditation training. When there's two mental factors that do the job. In fact, three of them. There's always more on the list, but three will do this today. So, two in their wholesome way, I often no. Let's just use the words for the moment, the real words. The first two are investigation analysis. That means that the mind is, on the one hand, directed towards something. That's why I often translate as curiosity. So you're directed towards something like that is worthwhile looking at. And then the other one, that is analysis. The investigation is that once you hold it, that you look at its details, like what am I looking at? Yeah. And so that is thought. But when we think of thinking, we think of linguistic thinking. But that's not what it is. Yeah. How you train your mind to be able to see in certain ways, investigated ways. But you don't do that by thinking. We start with thinking to clarify what we are looking at. That's what we just did in the meditation as well. I needed to show you something of the illusory aspect of that appearance of the self. But you don't linguistically think about it, you actively look at it. So you don't think they're absent, you notice that they're absent. And so in Buddhist parlor, when we talk about actually language in a broad sense or conceptuality, but you know, now some things are difficult to say in English. Yeah. But when we talk about, let's say, about language in general, then on the one hand, you have what they call names, and that is verbal. Yeah. You'll have to do with this, to say it very specifically, it's very difficult to say in English. But let's call it verbal for the moment. And the other one is conceptual. So you have a notion of something. Now I have a notion of the camera and I have the name camera. Yeah. And so when the mind is talking, it uses both, but in an unfortunate way. And what you want is to simply knowing that it's camera without thinking aloud the name. Yeah. Yeah. So you just train yourself in being aware of either the absence of some things and the presence of other things, just by like an active looking. Yeah. Yes. That also, by the way, that is one of the ways that it becomes very absorbing after a while, that active engagement, that active looking around. And that will also stop the commenting voice at one point. Yeah. It just disappears into the background. You're not, and that comes that word analytical again. You don't attend to it because you know nothing that is worth your while. Not self, just automated, blah, blah, blah. You can let it go. Yeah, that way. Yeah, so it's a good point. Yeah. That's how I showed this practice in general, and you nicely showed how you can apply that in particular. Yeah. And that's very worthwhile of doing, so to play with this technique. Yeah. And so what you end up with, and that is worthwhile to explore for a moment, and that answers your question that is sitting there with eyes closed and you don't know I'm pointing at you when you do that. No worries. So when I mentioned that sky-like nature of the mind and so on, that is the conventional nature of the mind. Yeah. The absence is the way it exists. It is non-findable. Yeah. So there's one step further. And that has something to do with what our mind can behold. It's quite unique. How will I say this? We can see, on the one hand, affirming things. So the table is an affirming thing. One could say it casts its aspect on my awareness. So yellow, bit of red, solid. So there's something affirming, something positive from the object. But what we don't often realize that equally often we see absences. And absences are inferred. You can't see them because nothing casts an aspect on your awareness. You infer it by way of something else. And so I see you, but by seeing you, I also infer that there is 4 meters of space between us. You can't directly show it. It's not an object of a direct awareness, but it's actually, well, at least for the moment, it's not. That's a long discussion. But in this case, I infer it by way of conceptuality. There's a moment of thinking in between that also tells me how far you are away from me. I can't directly see that. Yeah. I can't directly see the space between us. And we use that all the time. When you navigate through your house, as I highlighted this morning, you use especially your noting of absences. And so you infer from the positions of your furniture where your body can move and where it cannot move. You do that when you park your car. You see 2 cars and you infer that there's enough space to park your car in between, and so on and so forth, unless you have a very big car. And so that capacity to observe, to behold and hold on to an absence of something is something that we use relatively often. In fact, all day long. It's as important to us as seeing affirming things. And so, because we make it often more difficult than it is, it becomes difficult to hold on to. We can sort of get like into like, how must I do that? Well, you do that all the time. The same thing a little bit with practice of visualization. We imagine all day long. When I mention your car, you saw your car. And so we are all very capable, most of us are very capable of doing that, but then we have to visualize the Buddha, then it becomes difficult. Well, in fact, you do visualization all day long whenever, in fact, you mention an object that is not here. Yeah? And so we have a tendency to make practices far more difficult than they are. Like visualization is using memory. The same thing, you visualize the Buddha, and the same thing in the same way you remember your car. And that's the same thing here with absences. Yeah? So what you find is that there was an appearance, that appearance of that self that was not hired. And you first look, you get a good sense of what is appearing to you. Like, what is that? That is, it feels like something that is unchanging. It feels separated from the world somehow. And it is endowed with, to use something from, I think, your constitution, inalienable, some of these words I often see written, but I never pronounce them, inalienable characteristics. That is what appears to you. Yeah. And so to take that and just to happily swirl that around a little bit, to have a good sense of what is it that is appearing to me. Yeah. And you need to do that over and over and over. There's a lot there. Yeah. And then to go through what is findable in your awareness, like what is here. And to come to the conclusion that wherever you look, that you can't find. It is absent. And that is what is called emptiness. It's the non-findability of that appearance of self-existence. So there's simply something not there. In the beginning, that is confrontational. But at the same time, like when you conjure up that moment where you were not hired and you felt bad, and so when you turn that sense of self around, but also focus on the misery that it causes, so the difficulty of the situation, if you look at the absence, you also immediately realize something else. That as long as you're looking at the absence, all that misery can't arise. That absence is liberating. As long as you see the absence of self, no depression, no anger, no desire, none of these things can arise. Because you see what is there. And what is there can't give rise to unwholesome emotions. And then it starts to do something. And then the deeper your understanding is of that selflessness, the more you can start to use it throughout the day. And that when you have a good experience doing that with hiring, the next time you have a conflict, you can immediately interject that same awareness. Like, who are they angry with? I can't find that which makes me feel hurt. And at that moment, hurt stops. Mental suffering cannot arise at all. That is what we have to deploy very often, because that becomes very, on the one hand, you become better at using it. And on the other hand, it is extremely liberating. So it's self-feeding. Make sense? Yeah. So again, and that is worthwhile exploring before we do a final Mahāmudrā meditation. And so the self seems to exist independent of the body and the mind in a broad way. It seems to exist independent on surrounding or environmental conditions, including our parents. Like, why did you put me in the world? Like, well, without me, you would not exist. What are you talking about? And we seem to, and that is a very tricky one, we seem to exist without naming. But in fact, without concepts, the content of awareness will be empty. There will be nothing to know, and without knowing, there is no awareness. That's a tricky one. That takes some thinking, but for that we don't have time. Yeah. How about you can consider how would you navigate the content of your awareness if they don't have any concepts? There will be no navigating of awareness at all. There would just blank nothingness. You would have no sense of self. So you see that the sense of personhood arises only in relationship also to naming. And it's an important one because I want to highlight that again, as we already talked about it, that is also a gift that we have to give. And because, as we talked about earlier with that example for Bernie Glassman, we saw here that as this is the case, as we need concepts to be persons, this can also be taken away. Concentration camps are famous for taking away personhood and so on and so forth, deliberately stealing people of that, of the content of that concept, that they become no one. But the better aspect of it is that we can deliberate. That is one of the greatest gifts that we can give to others. Yeah, to acknowledge their personal, to look at people and say, I see you. I see you. For I acknowledge simply that you are here, and that was always sufficient. Yeah, and it's very different from the normal way we look at others. We look at others like, what do you have to offer? Do I like your type of person? And so on and so forth. That is the regular way our mind navigates the world, not very impressive. And to deliberately learn to do otherwise, to look at people simply acknowledging their presence is something that even animals will heavily respond to. Yeah. Almost everyone feels unseen, unacknowledged as a person. That is where loneliness comes from. That makes sense? So, again, the self that appears to us is therefore independent of parts, independent of causes and conditions, independent of labeling. And so what we're going to do is we're going to simply meditate on the nature of the mind for a while. Yeah. And then within that, we shall gently allow a sense of self to arise. Yeah. Yeah. Just let it. And don't worry, your mind will have no problem whatsoever to allow it to rise. I mean, it is pretty good at conjuring up the thing. Yeah, we could make a horror movie. We should make a horror movie about it, no? The thing, and then having the self come. That would be really, no, well, that might be too traumatizing for people. That might not be healthy. We should just keep it at other more normal monsters, I guess. And so to let it drift up. And when the moment it drifts up, simply to look at it. To look at it like, you appear to me, can I find it? And that's simply what you do. You then look directly at it. You look around it. And the weird thing is, the moment you start investigating, it's gone. And then you relax your investigation a bit, and you let it pop up again, and then runs away. It's like the ghost in the corner of your eye. When you look at it, the ghost is gone. But when you look here, ghost goes back. Yeah. And so you look back and forth until all of a sudden there is a deep sense, it's not here. It appears, but it's not here. There's nothing there. Yeah. And then you let yourself, when for the moment that arises, the absence, that appearance is hollow, as it were, then you allow your mind to dwell in that hollowness, that openness that is released behind. Does that make sense? So, relatively easy practice once you understand what we're talking about. So you will have to navigate with whatever understanding of emptiness you have, but let's just play around with it. Yeah. That's a good final exercise of the day, and at least I've done some Mahāmudrā with you. Is there another cushion? I need more. I actually need lots of cushion. Ah, here. Yes, thank you. I'm going to sit meters high. That's fantastic. Yeah. Let me get up for a moment and redo my thing. No, thank you. So online, you get to see how I do my cushions. That is also a very good meditative instruction. Yeah. That will do. That will be fun when I'm 80 years old. I'm sitting against the ceiling. Every year, one extra cushion. No, I'm fine. This is quite fine. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yes. Don't worry about it. This is occupational hazard. My arthritis my knee started to get inflamed in Burma. And it was like once a week, there was a doctor coming to the dispensary. And I said, well, I have a problem. He says, yeah, I know. And apart from different other things, I mean, that's a weird story. Maybe I will tell you at the end to just make you laugh. But then he says, well, we have like bandages that you can use for your knees. And so I went to one of the monks to get one of these bandages for the knees, and you open a cupboard and they had thousands of them. So it was like, I was not the only one with that problem. So when you sit 15 hours a day in sessions of 5 hours, at one point when you get older, that hurts. And so I was not the only one that figured out that a 5-hour afternoon session becomes painful at one point. So yeah. But to make you laugh, I went for a scan to the hospital nearby, military hospital. And the doctor wanted to, well, first of all, you get in, and as a monk, then there was a bench, there's a whole family sitting there, and then all the family go away so that you're on your own and sit on the bench, which was very embarrassing to begin with. But then I was then showed in to talk to the military doctor, and he says, can you show me your knee? And I said, well, okay, then. And he said, yeah, oh, I feel it. And I was like, what on earth are you doing? He's trying to make a pass at me. Like, okay, that's. I never went back to a hospital again. Like, I think I'm going to keep my problem. It's fine. I don't want doctors playing with my knees in that way. Yeah, that's not entirely comfortable. That was really weird. Yeah. What can you do? You know, like big stars and stripes like Burmese military have. You have a soldier in control, and then a soldier in control wants to play with your knee. Like, yeah, I mean, you have healing hands. I know I should not have said that. That would probably only make problems much, much, much worse. Anyway, to show that if your mind gets either dull or restricted, telling jokes or thinking about something funny is a very good mechanism. Yeah. It sort of, yes, enlivens the mind again. Yeah. But that's always very, very useful to do. So let's invoke amidst us the Buddha again. There where people seek freedom, Buddhas are surely present. The serene presence of a liberated mind. Not hindered by oppressive appearances, their consequences. With a free and obstructionless mind. Beholding us with limitless compassion. We might rejoice for a moment, living in an era of a living Buddha. person that practiced 3 countless eons to offer us this path. That taught it so well that the lived experience is still among us. A mind free of all faults, with all qualities set free. We may take a moment to fill space with magnificent offerings fashioned out of the beauties of our mind. Limitless amounts of flowers and incense, perfume, drinking water, music, light, medicine, to pay homage both to this most important guest and all living beings that he serves. We can lay the burden of our remorse and guilt at his feet. And exchange it for empowerment and a responsibility for the future. We can uplift and encourage our hearts by reflecting on the life-affirming qualities of all living beings and Buddhas. Generating a deep wish not to forget him. To hold within us his genuine Dharma. Aiming all our virtuous qualities of this session and beyond, of past, present, and future. Being able to join him in nirvana. Becoming a real turning king ourselves. Or queen, for that matter. We can imagine that light streams from the base of this request. From the Buddha's forehead, his throat, and his heart. White, red, and blue. Like a healing nectar. entering our body, speech, and mind, freeing them from oppressive imputations, oppressive thoughts. And setting free all our qualities as all ripen into Buddhahood. Then the Buddha dissolves into a golden light and mingles his mind with ours. We can come to rest with a space like limitless awareness of the Buddha. Equanimous and calm. In the clear and knowing mind. So let's take a few moments to cultivate this. By actively looking at this clear and knowing mind, knowing the qualities of being mindful of it, and the freedom from hindrances that it brings, and vice versa. And then within that space, let a gentle sense of I arise. Without disturbing the mind. And investigate it gently as well. It appears, but can you find it when you look for it? So it's a few times, giving rise to the I, then deeply looking at it. What am I seeing? Can you find anything about that I from its own side? Notice that whenever you just let it be, it appears. But the moment you apply scrutiny, it dissolves into thin air. Mentally conjuring of the mind. So again, rest in the nature of the mind. Let gently a sense of I appear. And then sort of peek gently. How does its appearance exist? Leaving nothing but an immediate emptiness behind. When you feel ready, allow the mind to rest in that absence, knowing how that feels. If you lose the emptiness, simply deploy the same method again. May whatever virtue we have collected benefit the teachings and all transmigratory beings. And may it especially cause the essence of perfect pure Losang teachings and those of his children, especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, shine forever. May all sentient beings be graced with the Bodhisattva's way of life by the virtue we have obtained today, or practice in the Bodhisattva's path. Through our merit, may all those in all directions who are afflicted by bodily and mental sufferings obtain oceans of joy and contentment. As long as the cycle of existence lasts, may their happiness never decline. May the world attain the constant joy of Bodhisattvas. Through this merit of ours, may all beings, without exception, abstain from every vice and always engage in virtue. Not lacking the spirit of awakening, devoted to the Bodhisattva way of life, embraced by the Buddhas, and free of the deeds of Maras. May monasteries be well established, full of chanting and study. May there always be harmony among the Sangha, and may the purpose of the Sangha be accomplished. May the Bodhisattva's wishes for the welfare of the world be fulfilled, and whatever the protector intended for sentient beings, may that be accomplished. May Parcheka Buddhas and Shravakas be happy, always worshipped by the lofty gods, Asuras, and humans. May we live endowed with strength in whatever posture we are. In all our lives we may find plentiful places of solitude. When we wish to see or ask something, may we see the protector Manyuta himself without any impediment. May our way of life be like that of Manjushri, who lives to accomplish the benefit of all sentient beings throughout the 10 directions. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may we too remain and dispel the miseries of this world.